control over our lives. Now, this is an infuriating topic for me, because I feel as though this is actually a really nuanced subject, and there are a lot of people, both on the right and the left, who have incredibly essentialist perspectives on it, which are not only wildly impractical, they also make it functionally impossible to discuss the nuance behind these arguments. So let's give it a shot, okay? So the first thing that we need to recognize is that there are two separate questions, okay? Now, obviously, we're talking about this because Donald Trump got banned off Twitter. So let's use that example as sort of like the instigatory subject, and we can discuss everything relative to that, relative to that event. So, question A, does big tech have too much control over our lives? Well, to me, the answer is yes, obviously. And that's a real problem, and something needs to be done about it. But then there's a second question. Was it good that Donald Trump was banned? And to me, the answer to this was yes. And these two questions are not mutually exclusive, nor are their answers. In fact, in many cases, they're actually completely separate to one another. Even if you believe, for example, the government has too much power, does that mean everything the government does is bad? Say, for example, you think the government has too much power. I think the government has too much power. I fucking hate the Patriot Act. Get into it. There are plenty of things the government does I'm not a big fan of, okay? At all. But let's say that I suddenly, I pick it up on the grapevine. I hear info about Johnny Rape Fingers. He's raped a different person with every finger. Really bad guy. Terrible person. And I have info to report them to the police. I have their hideout location or something, okay? Now, just because I believe the government has too much power does not mean that it would not be good for me to turn this motherfucker in. Johnny. You agree on that, right? Look past the stupid name. You agree with this, right? The reason for that, the reason why that's so obviously fucking agreeable, is because the question, is a use of government power good, is not the same question as, does the government have too much power? We rely day to day on actions from the government and from private corporations to live our lives. I live in a society. Most of you do too, I imagine. And whether it's the food that I eat, or the gas that I pump into my car, or the clothes that I wear, or the electricity that runs to my house, whether it's the roads that I drive upon, or my assurance that people probably won't murder me when I go in public, because if they did, they would be arrested by a police officer, my life is dependent on good behavior from both corporations and the state. That goes the same for you guys too. So I don't understand why it is that every time somebody says X action from tech company was good, people immediately deflect and turn that into a separate question about whether or not big tech has too much power. It's like people aren't even interested in answering the first question. They just instantly jump to the second one. They don't even acknowledge the difference between the two. I can't tell you how many times I've said, yeah, I'm okay with this person being banned off social media. And then somebody retorts, don't you think there's a problem, though, with how much power social media has? Well, yes, I do think that. But that doesn't mean this instance wasn't good. I'm sure you've seen this. You've watched my channel, I assume. You recognize this has happened like a lot, right? The context of these individual instances matter quite a bit. Now, the problem is that here's the argument you will always hear, okay? Here's the argument you'll always hear. The slippery slope argument. If you ban Trump off Twitter, or all these conservatives, whatever on Twitter, they're going to come after the left twice as hard, which is reductive for a number of reasons. Often, there's a legitimate thread there, because the left is maligned in a lot of ways, and because we are a legitimate threat to institutions with the power to malign us. But things are more complicated than that. So let's acknowledge this, okay? Why did Twitter ban Trump? Why? Anybody who thinks they banned Trump because he broke TOS is a fucking moron. And likewise, anybody who thinks that the only reason they banned Trump is because they wanted to get in good with Biden or because they hate conservatives, also an idiot. The reason why Twitter and Facebook and all these other companies banned Trump is because there was a combination of factors that allowed them to believe it would be beneficial to do so. It was probably a conversation they had for weeks beforehand with their investors and with everybody who had any hand in that decision. In reality, it was a combination of Trump having broken TOS to an extent, many times over the course of his presidency, and probably before, frankly, a massive instigatory event, the attack at the Capitol, in addition to a broad cultural shift against the actions of these far-right types to capitalize on the public denunciation of that attack on the Capitol. Additionally, you have, in all likelihood, some political playing here. In all likelihood, there's probably a decent, possibility that the fact that Biden is coming in influenced this. Do you think they would have banned Trump if he had actually won this election, but the insurrection attempt had happened anyway? Probably not. Because in all likelihood, Trump would have retaliated in some way against Twitter. He's been threatening to get rid of, Section 360, 320? What is it again? 230? 230, thank you. He's been threatening to get rid of that for a while, which is idiotic, by the way, because getting rid of 230 would make things way worse on the internet in every possible way, in addition to leading to more bans for political content creators. Way, way, way worse, let me tell you. But we've talked about that before. And also, the reason why they were comfortable banning Trump is probably because they wanted this to be part of like a broad sealing the tomb, so to speak. And now we have agreed, in civilized social media platforms, we do not have room for these far-right, violence-enabling dipshits, okay? We seal the cask on them. We lock them in the tomb. We do it on all social media platforms. They did it collectively, and you're a fool if you don't think that Facebook wasn't communicating with Twitter, wasn't communicating with Instagram, wasn't communicating with the Google Play Store, Google Apps, and Apple Play Store. They all talked to each other, and they all collectively agreed, this is a thing we can get away with doing right now. It would be beneficial to the country. It would be beneficial to our stockholders. It would be beneficial to our PR. So boom. Now, I don't pretend to know Facebook owns Insta. Okay, well, whatever. I don't pretend to know all the complexities of why they made the decisions they did, because I'm not a stockholder in any of those major tech companies, but that's probably about what motivated it. Now, with all that being said, you have to ask yourself again, in a vacuum, without any other consequences being considered, like, for example, future retaliation against the left, is it good to remove Trump and all these far-right types from social media? The answer to that gets very complicated. I think it's an easy yes. I think these people do irreparable damage to our democracy. They lead millions of people down a road that is very hard to walk away from. I think it brainwashes people into believing empirically incorrect things. I think it's just destructive to the fabric of our society. Now, a lot of people would at this point invoke the First Amendment, to which I must remind them, of course, that we are not talking about government retaliation. We are talking only about the behavior of private companies. The First Amendment only prevents the government from retaliating against you based on what you've said, and even then there are some stipulations. You can't make death threats, for example, obviously, but that feels like a cop-out, doesn't it? So it's not the government. Does that really mean it's okay for big tech to censor us? Well, that's a complicated question, but I've had it before on this channel, and at the end of the day, yeah, websites can have terms of service. Do you think websites shouldn't be able to have terms of service? This is the thing. If you believe a website can be allowed to have a terms of service agreement, that is to say you have to obey certain rules when you're on there, it necessarily follows that that website is going to have a terms of service agreement which is in line with maximizing the interests of the company that owns that platform. That's the case anywhere and everywhere. And since websites with no terms of service would be fucking insane, did you know it's not illegal to spam gore pictures and car accident photos to 7-year-olds on Facebook? You can do that legally, by the way. How would you feel if you went on a social media site and you were being spammed that, or your kids were being spammed that, and the person who was doing it could not be banned? Would that be good? Would that be a site you would want to use? Would that be something you think? Would you be like, yeah, fun? No, we're living it up in our TOS-free website. Is that not covered under obscenity law? I'm sure there are ways they could do it without inciting retaliatory action from the government. Is Twitter considered a public forum? That's an irrelevant distinction for what we're talking about at this moment. The point that I'm getting at is that when you actually like follow down the road, websites need TOS. Even 4chan has a TOS. Like, if you don't have a TOS, the only thing that you would have any obligation to remove from your platform is explicitly illegal stuff. And that way, even if you're posting explicitly illegal stuff, like, without the apparatus of a TOS, you kind of have to wait for like the government to step in. Because a TOS can also prevent you from posting stuff that's illegal, like actually illegal. And if you're not doing that, or like if you don't have a TOS to prevent that, like you'd have to wait for like a government takedown, or like you need TOSs, you need them. So if there are TOSs, it naturally follows that sometimes corporations will ban. That is just the inevitable conclusion of websites existing and social media websites existing. It's inarguable. Now, the follow-up question to that is, okay, even if you believe that getting rid of Trump was a good thing, and even if you also believe that it is essentially necessary for social media websites to have terms of service, do you still think there's a problem with the fact that all of these multi-billion-dollar tech companies can privately talk with one another in the background, and then afterwards essentially eliminate some forms of political speech from all relevant public discourse? And the answer to that question is yes. Of course that's a fucking problem. But the solution to that problem is not as simple as bitching every time those TOS restrictions lead to a good outcome. I don't like the fact that the police can, like, for example, what's that term? Asset forfeiture. I don't like asset forfeiture from the police. I don't like the fact that very often the police will just fucking pull over black guys and just pull them in on nothing, and they spend a day in the slammer and then they get pulled out. I don't like a lot of stuff. Civil asset forfeiture. Thank you very much. There are plenty of things that I don't like about the police. I don't like a lot of the stuff that the police do. I don't like the role they serve in society. I don't like the implicit agreements that they make with their communities that lead to them like selectively protecting some groups over another. I don't like that at all. Okay, I don't like that. But if Johnny Rape Fingers got arrested, I would not use that arrest as a soapbox to start complaining about society's role in the police. Do you think that's like, isn't that a weird time to do it? Like, really think about it. If like a rapist, if Weinstein got brought in, or Cosby was arrested, and you use that as an opportunity to start talking about the totalitarian role of the police in society, that's a little suspect, don't you think? A little suspect? Slightly, you know? I mean, you've probably seen it from like online libertarians, you know? Big anti-state types, but like, what do they complain about? Taxes in the age of consent. You wonder what their priorities are, right? That's the problem that I have with this. It really feels like if we want to have a conversation about the overwhelming power and influence of social media companies, it's weird that we keep doing it every time they do something right, like every time they do something that benefits society. Because let me tell you this much, friends, even if we got rid of the toxic incentives of social media companies, even if we lived in a post-capitalist, decentralized, socialist society with a strong public network that people have legal rights with, and like everything is solved, I would still be okay with like super crazy far-right people being banned from worker co-op businesses or from like publicly owned institutions. I would still be okay with that. The elimination of toxic state and corporate power doesn't mean everyone gets free reign everywhere all the time. Even if we fix the underlying problem with big tech having way the fuck too much power, even if we decentralized it or nationalized it or something, I would still be okay with that in some respects to some extents. Because the alternative is an environment where the public forum is amplified 1,000 times over and nobody can ever get taken down for anything. Even back when the public forum meant the town square, if you were over there screaming at the top of your lungs about like, actually, what would you get publicly denounced for back in like 1600? I was going to say like being pro-rape. Would you get like publicly denounced for being pro-rape in 1600? I don't know. Maybe. I genuinely don't know. I'm not sure. Being a witch, I don't know. Think of some dumbass shit that an idiot would be advocating for 400 years ago, 500, whatever. Think about it. They could still be taken away from the public forum. Even if they have a legal right to that space, they would still in other ways be excluded from it. And social disclusion is kind of an important part of social roles, much in the same way that the ability to shame or cringe at people is necessary in teaching others what acceptable behavior is. From stuff as simple as putting your elbows on the table, which I don't fucking care about, to like burping directly in other people's faces, which I think most people would agree is pretty rude, to like fucking hand-assing every lady you come across. The ability